Grüezi ragazzi, bienvenue and welcome to another episode of Cannabis Ciencias LinkedIn Live. Today we're going to be discussing everything from formulation strategies to regulatory compliance and beyond. Before we kick off today's live, big thank you to everybody who's joining us at the moment. Also, a big thank you to everybody that's going to check us out later. We appreciate each and every one of you. Before we get started with today's topic, we just want to talk a little bit about what Cannabis Ciencia does. Really, the core of our service is accredited education for healthcare professionals and doing our part to drive adoption by helping give healthcare professionals the tools that they need to integrate medical cannabis into their practice and pharmacy. We also recently, something we're very proud about, and big shout out to Viola and Fabio on this one, as well as our partners, Prohibition partners. We just released our Principles of Clinical Cannabinology Handbook, a powerful resource that is intended to really be a guide for healthcare professionals looking to integrate medical cannabis into their practice. Really starting with everything from the endocannabinoid system, the pharmacology of cannabis, therapeutic applications, as well as the different regulatory landscapes in medical cannabis markets across Europe. And really, one of the things that we've also tried to, with the physicians in mind, integrate is a complete list of the products available in all of the different markets. So if you have any questions or would like to learn more, please feel free to scan the QR code on your screen. And we just want to leave you, before we get started here, with the thought that we are convinced that through education, we increase adoption. Through adoption, we increase access. And through increased access, we help more patients. And so without further ado, today, we are joined by Anthony DeMeo, Director of R&D at Somai Pharmaceuticals. So first and foremost, Anthony, thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you both for having me.
We're very appreciative of your time, and we're also appreciative of the fact that it's early where you are right now. So perhaps before we dive into it, you could give us a little bit of an intro about yourself, a little bit of a background, and then we'll take it away.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Anthony DeMeo. I'm the Director of R&D at Somai Pharmaceuticals, based in Lisbon, Portugal. I have been in the cannabis space for about 9 years, almost 10 years now, since the beginning of 2014. And prior to the cannabis space, I was responsible for the manufacturing, synthesis, and compounding of nuclear medicines, radiopharmaceuticals for drugs, imaging drugs for myocardiograms, such as ammonia N13, as well as some cancer imaging drugs, FDG or an F18 molecule. So lots of background in synthesis and chemistry and quality control.
Thank you. We want to get a bit into the juice, since the title of today is quite deep in formulations and also the challenges of regulatory compliance in a kind of difficult landscape like that one of EU GMP in obviously in Europe. So I would love to start by really, if you could start to take us by a hand and maybe describe us, of course, from your perspective as the Director of R&D at Somai, if you could please just elaborate a little bit on what's the process really that goes behind formulating new cannabis-based products, because I'm sure most of us, when they finally see a product on the shelf, they don't really know all the years, perhaps, of work that there's been behind all that.
Yeah.
So, how do you ensure high standards? How do you ensure that that product is going to be reproducible in a sense? And how do you ensure that there is accuracy in manufacturing? Especially, it's even more interesting the fact that you are dislocated on the opposite side of the world. So I have so many questions for you today, basically.
Yeah, we could probably talk for the whole day. So everybody, buckle in on this topic. But no, it's a great question, and it's something that I think most patients or people just in general don't think about. What did it take to create a medicine?
Yeah.
And if we go backwards a bit, before cannabis, if we talk about pharmaceuticals in general, we're talking about one drug, one molecule to one indication, and that's what it is, and that's what we focus on. But with cannabis, it's obviously much different, because we're talking about a plant that's comprised of hundreds of compounds that all have various interactions in our bodies. And even to make that more complicated, they also interact with one another. So it's very challenging to just say, hey, I'm going to make a cannabis product for X, Y, or Z, because it does so many things at the same time. And that's a sort of blessing and a curse of cannabis, right? It's great because it allows us to be creative and focus our research in a direction, and there could be proof, but also it could be a curse because we may miss our target completely, because what we think is working, what molecule we think are doing the job, are not doing the job. And a really good example of that I just had happen with our scientific advisory board at SOMI this last week. There's been lots of research on CBN as an example. And CBN at a certain point in time was trending towards helping with sleep to some degree. A combination of CBN, CBD, maybe a little bit of THC, because that could be a sleep antagonist at times. But some blend of these three cannabinoids seem to have helped with sleep. And so we discussed this, but it just so happens that on our scientific advisory board, the guy who wrote those research papers is involved. And he said, well, actually, it's not trending that way anymore. The research is showing the opposite. And so we didn't get to go into the nitty gritty as to, what those details are. But that's part of what makes cannabis particularly challenging, because as we fine tune the research, we're going to find that some of the conclusions we may have believed even 2 or 3 years ago are much different now.
Yeah, I guess that's science in general, though.
That's,
But
of
yeah,
course.
I agree that network pharmacology or polypharmacology, it's it's a very interesting challenge to be facing, for sure. And then there is also the other problem with cannabinoids, that they have biphasic effects. So the dosing also really does matter. And so yes, then we can potentially see completely opposite results to what we
Yes.
were hoping, just on the basis of a dose. So when we want to translate, and I speak as a preclinical researcher, when we want to translate in vitro onto reality, may take us in a completely different world. So
Exactly.
that's why I really appreciate your work and your role, because it's that of trying to uh, make some clarity and find some clarity in all of these chaos, in all of this overwhelmingly amount of information, and still come out with valuable, standardized and reproducible products. So that is quite a challenge just on its own, even
It,
just to follow all the science and
yeah.
combine it. Yeah.
Well, and then it becomes more complex, right? So let's just say we did land on something that works, and we have the trials that prove it works. Okay, that's fantastic. We've went through in vitro, in vivo, stage 1 or stage 2 clinical trials, and everything is trending in the right direction. Well, now let's make this product. Let's whatever the form factor may be is irrelevant, but let's make the product and let's put it into stability. Well,
Yeah.
now we're at a whole new set of obstacles, right? Because things like terpenes are volatile. They're always in cannabis. They're almost always in the extract. And as they volatilize, they're going to change the composition of the solution we made, or whatever the form factor may be. So we may fail stability. And then we have to reevaluate, how are we packaging this drug, this formula? And by packaging, I mean, is it an oral solution? Is it a capsule? Is it a powder? Whatever. How are we packaging it so that it remains stable? Or what do we need to add to keep it stable? And when we add that, how does it impact everything else downstream of it, right? So it isn't always just as easy as, finding your indication, finding your right mix of cannabinoids or compounds from the plant, and then packaging them together. It definitely has some downstream effects once you start actually manufacturing these products.
Totally. Entering a little bit more in the pragmatic, what's the work process behind, for example, determining the most suitable ratios of cannabinoids for different medical conditions? I couldn't help but notice that Soma's product pipeline is quite different from what I'm seeing around here in Europe, and it's very interesting for the dosing ratio of the API used. So then it's quite an honor actually finally speaking with the mind behind all of this. So how was the mind how was
I,
the
I
work process behind all of this?
I never take full credit for everything because I'm just one piece of the puzzle. So
Sure.
really, first off, how we got there is we sort of do a round table, right? It's myself, the CEO, director of manufacturing, as well as other members of the scientific advisory board. And we say, okay, first, what exists in the market? Because that's important, right? Just from a business perspective, we don't want to do what everybody else is doing exactly because we can't find our lane. So that's first question. And so we eliminate those options. Then we say, okay, where is the research pointing? And so we literally scour any research available to us. And we hire other pharmacologists and clinicians and people who have done much more in-depth work and say, okay, where is cannabis actually helping? What are the indications that cannabis seems to have evidence to help? So, we find things like chronic pain, nausea from chemotherapy, small MS success, epilepsy, sleep disorders. There's some evidence to suggest that cannabis helps there. And so we dive deep into the research. Okay, well, what is the required dosage in this research that they've had some success or were able to draw their conclusions from. And so we start there. We say, okay, we know that it takes 100 milligrams per kilogram of CBD, and we build a formula from there. And then we have to look at it, of course, and say, well, this doesn't really make sense because if we have this much CBDA or CBD in a product, it's gonna nucleate and crystallize, and it's gonna be a failure. So we have to sort of backtrack and balance those things out. But that's how it begins. We eliminate what the market is doing, then we look at the research and we say, the research is pointing this direction. Let's start there because otherwise you're just shooting in the dark, right? So we find the cannabinoids, the terpenes, the other minor constituents that are all relevant, and we try to put them into a final product. And it's easy for us to say that's what we're doing. That's always the easiest part. Again, the challenges come from a regulatory perspective. Things like THCA, which is a molecule that we want to explore, is difficult to work with because it has different requirements. So we have to treat it as an API, which means we have to do full clinical research behind the molecule, which is challenging for us to bring a product to market, right? So it's going to take years of research to bring a product like that to market. And that doesn't even, again, talk about stability issues with THCA. So that's a whole different avenue of problems. So we sort of go down that process almost every day when we reevaluate what it is that we're doing. And just to backstep a little bit, when we started, we sort of had three indications that we wanted to focus on because they were important to us personally. So chronic pain, nociceptive pain, neurological disorders. Those are things that we wanted to focus on. Neurodegradation, excuse me. So we wanted to make a product that's neuroprotective, that helps with chronic pain. So that was sort of avenue A. Avenue B was multiple sclerosis. We have members of our team who have that, this condition personally, and so we thought, hey, let's make a medicine that speaks to us, right? Because then we're invested in our medicines. And then the third is sleep disorders, because we think that's sort of an untapped market. Of course, it's very, very challenging. There's a million reasons people could have sleep disorders. It could be, sleep apnea. It could be from chronic pain or from fibromyalgia or even from MS. So we knew the general indication, but we're still figuring out the specifics. And I think anybody who looks at our product offerings will see, like, hey, they're trying to hit a lot of marks, and we really are. We really find that important, but we're still doing the work to prove we're going to hit the mark.
I find interesting that you mentioned, I guess, aside from MS, mainly conditions that are, of course, looking at clinical trials around the world, especially in the past 10 years, they have been focusing mainly on pain. And then now it's opening as well on neurodegenerative disorders and sleep disorders for sure. But I find as a researcher quite challenging to enter this type of studies, because then they're based on subjective scales. Obviously, I'm not trying to belittle what pain is, but it's as you know, a big container where many things, many areas are included, one of which, and it's fundamental and is related to sleep disorders as well as many other symptoms. It's really affective pain. And so perhaps one of the really interesting role there of the endocannabinoid system is that of balancing not just our physiology, but then also perhaps also our psychology in a sense, and by managing to calm us down or bring us to a better balance, how we can rescue the physical symptomatology of that.
Yeah.
But I find it definitely interestingly challenging to address this with research. Not then also very effective to be able to offer solutions, because of course this is a lot of people, and luckily cannabinoids seem to have pretty interesting effects in this regard. By doing quite an extensive review recently on pain, it's interesting how statistically at the end, I mean, acute pain, let's not include it in the mix, or post-op pain, difficult. But with, as you mentioned, neuropathic and inflammatory pain, it's beautiful to see how really cannabinoids are effective. But then when you look at the scaling rates, they are not statistically really efficacious. But then it's actually the quality of life of that person that is completely improved. And so going back to what you just said, it's amazing to really see how a team looks at as its own people and says, "Hey, this person is suffering. How can we make their life, like their quality of life, better?" And it's really amazing. And I think most of us working in this industry really are looking at this, are looking at the people that we have around, and we try to see, well, if I cannot rescue this disorder for them, how can this therapy alleviate their pain and alleviate their suffering?
I think it helps because one thing that I've observed in my professional experience here is when we're talking about developing drugs, whether it's a pharmaceutical or even the cannabis in the commoditized market in America, people lose sight that we're making medicine and that there is a patient at the end of what it is that we're making. There's somebody who's going to be affected, and we lose that, right? Because we get caught in our own day-to-day activity. We're making something, we're working, we're doing a job, and we become jaded or blinded. And so for us, and definitely for myself, I try to remind myself that there is somebody who's going to be taking this, and this is their medicine, and I need to make sure that the effort we're putting into this has proof behind it. not just that we want it because we want to feel good, that we've done something to help, help people, but we actually want to help. And so I think that, is an important piece that I do believe we at SOMI have. And I'm hoping other businesses continue with that trend, like you said, because a lot of these conditions, like pain, are subjective and they're very personal. Because chronic pain, especially, can, as you said, mess with you psychologically in ways that the pain itself isn't doing. It's your own self. So, anyways, I'm ranting a bit here, but this is a
No,
very
I think
personal
you're
thing.
really helping me to bring actually forward the conversation exactly on what it is to make a medicine. And so we set ourselves up for working in certain standards. And for example, talking of good manufacturing practices, as we know, they are theoretically, and then you'll tell me about because I don't work under GMP
Yeah.
in my office, but theoretically, they should be essential for ensuring quality, safety, and integrity of pharmaceutical products. So I was wondering, how does SOMAI and how do you incorporate the GMP criteria into manufacturing processes for products that at the end, as you just said, are plant-based products, or they are phytoceutics in a sense.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could just give us some examples of perhaps specific GMP guidelines or practices that you guys are following and that are helping to guarantee the high standards for quality
Yeah.
control. And perhaps also, on the other hand, I'm going to be cheeky, some challenges that you guys encountered, and are you going around that, or how did you already go around that?
Sure. Yeah. So, as a EU manufacturer of any pharmaceutical, we must follow GMP guidelines, and it's not anything that we are unfamiliar with. I myself have worked in the GMP environment for about 10 years, minus the SOMAI experience. And then we have other members of our team, such as Antonio Marquis de Costa and Antonia Godhela, who are both directors at the company, who have worked within the GMP space for pharmaceutical manufacturing for 30 plus years each. So we have lots of experience. And it all starts from the beginning, right? It starts at, where are we sourcing our products from? And that's very, very challenging sometimes. So we must find reputable sources that can provide us with, lists of everything they've used to manufacture their own products, making sure it complies with the EU GMP guidelines, making sure any oh man, I'm having a brain fart here. I apologize. Any other consumable we may use, or excipient we may use, is in in EMA and has its dossier. So it all starts there, and then once we begin manufacturing, we have to log and track every single step we make, as well as have a secondary check, right? So we have an operator performing a task, and simultaneously we have a QA signing off on the task to ensure that what they did conforms with our standard operating procedures, which we spent a lot of time developing that as well. Then once we've manufactured a product, or even during manufacturing, we're taking samples. So if we're talking about the extraction process, there's a point where we must remove the solvent from the micella so that we have a crude oil. We have to sample it essentially every 30 minutes or so to check the residual solvent levels and make sure that they're below 2%. So we're constantly doing that in process. And then after the process, we have to make sure that our cannabinoid ratios are accurate. So we do a test on the HPLC to ensure that all of the cannabinoids are present as they should be. We also, again, check for residual solvents. We do a terpene analysis. We do microbial analysis to ensure that there isn't anything nefarious growing inside of our extract. So we're really checking everything almost at every single step of the process. Then once we've made a product, we repeat all of those same tests again to sort of double check ourselves and make sure that it's conforming. One of the biggest challenges with cannabis, and probably with all herbal medicines, is reproducibility. That's tough because you're growing a plant, and plants are living things, so there's going to be variation. So for us, when we extract, we had to be really specific about defining what acceptable variance is. And that's hard, right? For us to say, well, when we extract this, we anticipate 75% THC at the end of this extraction. But the reality is, sometimes you have poor extraction efficiency. Sometimes the plant has other phenols, flavonoids, chlorophylls, waxes that the previous batch didn't have. Even though the THCA is the same before you extract, the output could be different because of the other constituents that aren't necessarily being quantified up front. So there's lots of challenges that herbal medicines have that traditional pharmaceuticals don't. And maybe one day in the future, we will be able to synthesize certain cannabinoids or certain compounds from the plant and use them in medicines, but we're not there yet. So we don't talk about it. We just spend time figuring out how to do it.
And I guess, thank you. That was, I guess I'm curious still. I guess all of this monitoring, for example, batch to batch variations, it's all done in-house directly, or do you need to? Yes, it's done
Yeah.
in-house. That's a lot of
Yes.
work.
Yeah. So we built a full QC lab at SOMAI to ensure that we don't need to, but we still do rely on third-party analytics to produce any medicines at our factory, and also because we want to test things. So we want to see our impact on what it is that we're doing immediately, and not wait a week or whatever for another company. And then typically what we'll do is we'll take our results and every few batches we'll send it to a third party and just verify that what we've done, because we always need to check ourselves as well.
Sure, totally. Thank you. Thank you very much. I invite, since we have the last literally 5 minutes, anyone who's here who would like to have their curiosity around what's the process behind formulating a new product and how tough it is to work in a GMP environment, to use this time to ask directly D-Man on the topic. Otherwise, I will just continue exhausting my own curiosity on yes, yeah, never ending. No, because you keep on talking about THCA, and I must admit that since the what year was it? I believe 2011. I was in a conference in Munich, in Germany, somewhere in Germany, in Köln. And there I met this very, very interesting doctor from California, and he was giving raw cannabis juices around to his patients. And that definitely was something new that I never heard about, but it was making complete sense, of course, from a chemical perspective, in the sense that at first I was kind of shocked because he was telling me that the dosing that he was giving, and I was like, wow, you're intoxicating your patients. But then I just realized, I was like, yes, but I mean, Viola, like there is no decarboxylation process happening. So he is not intoxicating his patients. These molecules are larger than neutral cannabinoids. They're not even penetrating the blood-brain barrier. So how are even these molecules working? This is so interesting. And since you are also from the States, and you are mentioning again a lot on THCA, why not working directly with the raw plant at this point instead of waiting for? Because I totally feel you when you were talking about stability. That is a big problem with,
Yes.
of course,
There
acidic cannabinoids. Yeah.
So of course, we see that THCA helps with neurodegenerative disease, right? It interacts with the PPAR gamma receptor. So we know that there's some evidence that it could help here. Now, why don't we work with raw plant? And that's a fantastic question, but it comes with a fantastic problem. Um, and you touched on it before we hopped on the live here. You asked if I did solventless extraction. And the truth is, yes, I do. We've done it. So my plans to do it in the future. But one thing that always comes with a living plant is living microbes. And when we're talking about any pharmaceutical product, microbes are the enemy, right? They're the ultimate enemy. And so that is the number one hurdle of starting with raw plant or using raw plant. And also with these solventless based extractions, we're mixing the plant with water. And even if we're adding something to make the cannabinoids miscible in water, we're still introducing the perfect environment for microbes. And it's very, very, very challenging to eliminate those microbes without degrade or really decarboxylating the THCA to delta 9 THC, because the most common way we would do it is with heat. Maybe it can be done with gamma radiation. That's totally possible. But now we've opened up a whole nother can of worms, right? So now we're testing for radiation and radioactive activity. So that's probably the biggest hurdle that I see just from the question you've asked.
I mean, in Europe, in Italy, for example, all the cannabis that is given through pharmacies to patients is all gamma radiated.
Sure, and it is. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
It's definitely
Now, is that the best
more
way
common.
to? I could do a live on this topic for sure. If whether
Exactly.
that's the best way to take care of microbes. Yes. Yeah, I see your point. We need to speak more, Anthony. So
Sure, I would love to.
I would love to continue this conversation, perhaps in a new live. But I see Visions is here with us, so that only means one thing:
Yeah.
that we we already arrived at the end of this live. As I told you before, it just goes by really fast. Thank you everyone for connecting. I see some of you are writing here. Again, if you are okay, just saying hello. If you have any questions, you can also follow directly with Somai and lots of people that are in there that can deliver these questions back to Anthony or our team.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we just want to take this opportunity to thank you, Anthony, for joining us today. It was a very interesting talk, and I think you made a very appropriate comment at the beginning. We could literally talk about this topic all day, and so I apologize for being the one to have to make the cutoff here. But I think that we should definitely have you on again very soon, and to talk about how to use cannabis in the raw plant, how to also identify and combat the microbes. So a lot of topics to dive into. Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody that tuned in today as well. If you haven't yet, head over to our LinkedIn page and give us a follow. We do these every single week. And big thank you to Anthony DeMeo, Director of R&D at Somai Pharmaceuticals. Have a good day,
Thank you a
everybody.
lot. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Ciao.